Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of GreyhoundTV ONTrigger. Although on this platform, we actually host and mostly roast executives from large technology vendors, but we wanted to sort of shake things around a little bit for this time and actually host an end user client who I personally actually admire quite a bit. I've met him twice, I think in the last 2 years in Singapore mostly. And I've really, found his thoughts very refreshing. So it's a pleasure for me to host Mr. Robert O, who is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Digital and Chief Operating Officer of the Digital Innovation Business Unit at the Doosan Group. In terms of introduction, and for those who are uninitiated, Doosan Group is one of the largest conglomerates based out of South Korea, the most respected brand in the region in Asia, and of course, globally, has investments in Americas and Europe, and of course, all across Asia. And the man of the show, Mr. Robert. Robert is actually, he's been around for 30 odd years, I would say. And he's worked with very large corporations, of course, right now, Doosan, but also Hanon Systems, Masco, Dow Corning, and this is across Asia, Europe, and the US. So we're going to be talking to somebody who's got a very global view, and I'm super excited. So, Robert, welcome to the show.
Sanchit, I'm excited to be here. I enjoyed my interactions with you. I know I met you twice, most recently in Singapore. And I also found your discussions and your questions and your thoughts to be very, very leadership oriented. And obviously you're one of the thought leaders that I respect as well. So I'm really glad to be here on this show. And I really, once again, appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk to you today.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Robert. So, even before we start talking digital, Doosan, I really want to sort of peel the layers on the executive behind you. Who's really Robert? What really drives him? What really motivates him? Are there passions he drives inspiration from outside of work?
Sure, Sanchit. Let me kind of give you your questions in maybe three different types of answers to you, right? Number one is the company that I work for, Doosan Group, as you alluded to. We're the oldest modern corporation based out of Korea. So we're 126 years old as of this year. And as of August of this year, we're going to turn 127 years old, right? So it's a long history. And as you would imagine, we went through a lot of history and a lot of transformation throughout our history of the corporation. And, working for Doosan Group is very, very interesting from my sense because we have so many different businesses in so many different countries. Keeps my intellectual curiosity as well as my passion for learning going every hour I work for Doosan. So this is one motivation, number one. Number two is, we have about 30 businesses within the corporation. So being in charge of digital transformation at the corporate level, working with all of our great businesses, great brands, that's another great source of motivation that keeps me going and keeps me engaged every single day, every single hour. The third thing is you also have to manage your stress too, Sanchit, right? Yeah. So one of the things I do is to make sure that I do somewhat non-work related things to occupy some of my time too. So three things I spend a lot of time on is number one, I'm a huge fan of the financial market, the stock market. So I started investing when I was a teenager. Wow. And I've been following Warren Buffett as a great investor since my teenage years. So reading up about the market, watching CNBC, Bloomberg. As you would probably laugh at me, Sanchit, these are my hobbies. And I also like reading annual reports of companies without putting me to sleep.
Seriously,
right? So
is that a hobby, Robert?
These are my hobbies. Isn't it a crazy hobby, Sanchit? And then the second thing is I also like watching sports, all kinds of sports, whether it's baseball, American football, golf tournaments, to name a few. I like watching sports, and I also like participating in, I would say, one sport, which is golf. Okay. It's been a lifelong struggle for me, Sanchit. It's a lifelong struggle. Every time I play golf, there's that one shot that brings me back to the course. But the game of golf hasn't really loved me back yet. So I'm still working on getting that, love back from the game. But that's one of the things that really keeps me going.
We should definitely meet up for a game of golf as well, Robert, sometime,
I know. I'm a beginner. I'm sure you're a pro. So, you need to teach me.
I'm a beginner as well.
And then the last thing, Sanchit, you'll laugh at this one too. The tower that I work in, Doosan Tower, this is one of the tallest buildings in Seoul. And what I like to do is actually, you'll laugh at it, I like to walk up the stairs. This gives me two things. One is away from work, time to think as I climb up the stairs. And number two is it also gives me time to work out, right? So whenever I come into work in the morning, I go into the staircase. I just walk up to my office before I have my cup of coffee. And I do this after lunch as well. So this is one way to decompress and get away from work.
Well, it's very fascinating. I'm not laughing at all. I'm laughing at myself, Robert, because I should do the same probably, So
Next time you visit Seoul, we'll do this together.
I will. But I saw one of your pictures on LinkedIn with the man himself, right? And you met him. Tell me, what was the experience of meeting the man of the Wall Street, or what some of the key learnings you got from him?
So Sanchit, I didn't have to pay $1 million to meet Mr. Buffett. I ended up paying $682. I remember exactly how much I paid. It was my airfare.
Oh, is that
flying
so?
to Omaha, right? So I was actually selected to go to Omaha from the school that I went to, Emory University, and they basically picked me as the representative among a few other schools to go to Omaha, Nebraska, and it worked out. Life has kind of magical way of working out. Sanchit, it was actually happened to me on my birthday. It wasn't planned that way. It was my birthday in 2010 where I had the chance to meet with Mr. Buffett, spent about maybe 3 to 4 hours with him.
Wow.
At one-on-one in a group, right? To talk about kind of his experience, his viewpoints around economy, what sectors of the world he believes in and why, and what his personal kind of philosophy would be in terms of how he carries himself, right? So fascinating experience. Couple of learnings from him. Number one is he told me to focus on my internal dashboard instead of worrying about the external dashboard. I think what he meant to say was, as long as you're confident and you're sure about what you do, ethically as well as work-wise, that's all you have to worry about instead of worrying about all the external noises. That's one thing I learned a lot. The second thing, Sanchit, you laugh at it too, where I was the only person that brought him a gift. I was working for a consumer products company, and this is where I went to my PR department and say, hey, I'm meeting Mr. Buffett. I need to bring him something nice.
Wow.
My PR department gave me a Waterman pen. You'll see it on my LinkedIn that Warren Buffett holding onto this bag.
Yeah, I saw. That's right. Yeah.
That's the gift I prepared. So I gave it to him. And you know what Mr. Buffett said? I said, the world is so small. He said, Robert, you must work for Newell Rubbermaid. He recognized the company I worked for based on the brand of pen that I gave him. But what was more funny was he said, Robert, I know that because I sold this company to Newell about 10 years ago when he owned Gillette, right? Gillette, and he had to spin off the pen business, and he basically sold that business to Newell 10 years ago without kind of me obviously connecting the dots. So he basically said, hey, Robert, Newell Rubbermaid, I sold this brand to you. And he lifts it up. He goes, Robert is the only guy that brought any gift for me.
So nice.
He goes, so he'll get all the time in the world. And he wasn't kidding. So I ended up spending a lot of time with him one-on-one. So lessons learned is, again, having an internal dashboard. Number two, being prepared.
That's so meaningful. And you know what? Next time we meet in person, I will pick your brains on what more you learned from Mr. Buffett. But I think in the interest of time for now, I think let's quickly switch back to digital and Doosan and technology.
Look, great.
I'm pretty fascinated by the length and breadth of your experience. You've of course had a illustrious experience in terms of being focused on manufacturing as a sector, but what I'm also very impressed with is your laser sharp focus on digital, and how do you sort of, let's say, build an intelligent enterprise around that, and how do you sort of build digital grounds up from infrastructure up perspective up to cybersecurity. But what I really want to ask you at the starting is that, as somebody who's done the rounds of the industry for 30 plus years, what, in your opinion, have been those significant moments in technology in terms of trends? Which are the big waves that you see will really truly define technology here on?
From my experience, as you alluded to, I've been around the block, right, Sanchit? I worked in a lot of regions and a lot of industries, as you mentioned, mainly around manufacturing. So, some of the key moments that I witnessed as a technology leader over the course of my career is, number one, remember that Netscape browser? When Netscape browser was introduced, it changed the world on how we interacted with the internet, how we interacted with the data, why consumer experience mattered back then, right? So it was early 90s when Netscape came aboard. It created a lot of Web 1.0 related transformation as a result. And, quickly forwarding to about mid 2005 or so, this is where Web 2.0, social media, led by Facebook was born. And once again, that evolution changed how we interacted with our friends, peers, and our associates without being in the same room or same location, as you would recall. And then fast forwarding a little bit further, Web 3.0 is also challenging some of our paradigms. Although Web 3.0 is still shaping up to be something, we don't know what the end goal would be, but we know that Web 3.0 is going to also revolutionize what we do, right? So these are some of the main bodies of kind of trends that I saw. And underneath it, that I've noticed in my career are a few things. One is organizational talent readiness was one of the key considerations that you had to do. Being able to not only evolve your technology stack, but being able to evolve your employee and your stakeholder groups' viewpoints on new technology and getting them ready was probably one of the key toughest thing that not only me, but other technology leaders had to do. So, tying this back to kind of how, that experience led me to looking at how we go about Doosan's digital transformation. So we've defined 3 layers in our transformation strategy. Number one, as I alluded to, the people aspects of it, which is all about cultural and people transformation. There are 2 corporate-wide layers that we've defined at the corporate level that we are trying to evolve and mature over time. Number one is ways of working. As I mentioned to you, Doosan being one of the oldest companies, we have a lot of traditional, well-known, well-codified ways of work. But some of those ways of work may not resonate so well in the new digital world, right? One of the things we are focusing on doing is creating this way of working view, including agile methodology or embracing agility, looking at security ops model, being able to embrace design thinking for creativity, cross-collaboration, as well as creating brand new outputs. But more importantly, Sanchit, I'm a huge fan of design thinking, but I'm also a bigger fan of design doing, as I call it. Once you think, you need to execute, right? So being able to create that layer, tying this with different methodologies, I'll talk to you a little bit more about, call it 3A strategy, to make sure that we can evolve our ways of working within the corporate. Above it is, we call it digital functional talent management framework, which is all about identifying our functional competency gaps, such as AI, data, or quantum computing, to name a few. But not only identifying gaps, but having a development or recruiting plans that's tied into how do we go about creating our talent pool to address our gaps over time. And then finally, obviously, how do you retain them is another consideration in this, cultural people aspects of what we do.
It's very interesting. I'm gonna pick you on this because I do have a few set of questions for you, Robert, around especially around cultural evolution and team capabilities. But you mentioned about AI, ML, you mentioned quantum, you mentioned Web 3.0. And before we sort of move on any further, I really want to pick your brains on something. Like in the industry of technology that we are in, every 6 months there's something brand new hitting your table, right? Sometimes there's quantum, now it's LLMs, although it's not new, but Chat GPT is, in short, it becomes net new for all of us. But how do you sort of filter this information? How do you sort of cut out the hype as to what's really relevant to you from a use case perspective? One is that. And second of all, when you're sort of making a business case or a use case internally, how do you sort of onboard other leaders to be able to sort of, let's say, ask for fresh funding for things that you've never planned 6 months before, right?
Right, as you're right, I think maybe technology evolves at such a rapid pace. It's a tough job for executive leaders in technology to keep up to date. And not only that, not only keeping up to date, but making those changes or new technology stacks relevant to your business, right? So that's always a tough one. So, obviously the learning curve as well as constant learning activity has to happen first for all the global leaders. So I like learning. I like constant learning. I like reading different things. I like watching different videos. I like experimenting with different new technology. So first step of kind of learning about new technology or new things is not being afraid of ambiguity, because anything new, as you all know, is very ambiguous for anybody, not just you and me, but anybody that's facing, for example, like 2 years ago, who knew about NFT, right? Now who heard about ChatGPT until recently? But those new concepts, I call that ambiguity, sources of ambiguity. But my view is not being afraid of those ambiguous scenarios, but being able to learn and decipher, as you alluded to, what this new thing is and what are the business implications tied to it. So that's kind of one active way of admitting that ambiguity is okay.
Mm.
But more important, how do you actually cut through the noise, through the ambiguity is one step that I really focus on. I'll give you a little more examples on that.
Please.
The second thing is I call it the alliances model, where I build alliances with startups, alliances with existing companies, alliances with researchers like yourself, as well as other thought leaders to really understand their view of the world as it relates to different technology, because maybe perhaps they have deeper knowledge or deeper research into the topic. So I'm a huge believer in I cannot learn everything all by myself. I need to have a global alliance of partners that I can rely on to bounce off different ideas to formulate my own viewpoints. The third thing is once I have ambiguous scenarios that I decipher through different sources, build my alliances to understand the thought leadership and formulate my own opinions, then I take this into agility, which is all about trying different things out in the areas of new technology. Instead of just reading up about it, when possible, do small POCs within your teams to experience. Based on the experience, you take this learning back to the first cycle.
Interesting. And this resonates so well with one of the feedback I was actually reading on your LinkedIn. It said, one of your superpowers is to actually translate all that's in technology and sort of, synthesize it so well for the business that it really gives real life outcomes. So it's clearly showing, and thank you for that. But, as you sort of, you're actually managing a juggernaut. It's a 127-year juggernaut, right? And when you sort of, trying to change course of this juggernaut, having executive buy-in is the most difficult part of that. At least that's what our advisory experience tells us. Now, how in your position are you sort of ensuring you get this executive buy-in for simple things like, the company way of work, as you said yourself, was a very different one about 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But how are you sort of ensuring that executives or the board above you actually buys what you have to say about latest technology and infusing it in daily lives of your people?
So to say ongoing progress for me, I wouldn't say I've learned everything about getting the buy-in. As we all do within the executive positions, we all kind of struggle through it, learn from it, and revise our approach and fine-tune our approach to get the ultimate buy-in. Now, I view our stakeholders not only from an executive point of view, I view it in three different dimensions. Number one is executive, obviously very, very important because they hold the P&Ls and they hold the funding. But in the middle, you have your peers, right? Peers of the organization where they also have influence of different leaders and different parts of the organization. So having peer group buy-in is also very important. And then the third tier is getting the entire organizational buy-in from the front line of the employee. I think I would argue that that's the toughest part, getting people's alignment and their heart into what we're trying to do. But having said that, as we're kind of looking at multidimensional view of how do you get the buy-in, the first thing is to make sure that we have a common vocabulary around what it is that we're trying to transform. So which is the reason why when I spoke to you about digital transformation, some of the framework we're using, the framework is well understood across the organization. We have three layers of digital transformation. As I mentioned to you, cultural transformation, enterprise scale platform transformation technology, as well as what it is that we're trying to produce through digital, whether it's operational effectiveness, products and services, or new business. So we need to have a common framework that describes what it is that we're trying to do, but more importantly, why is it important today versus tomorrow? Right. So building that common language is very important that we do all the time within Doosan. I'm sure other leaders are doing the same thing. Number two, a step of the process is to make sure not only what it is that we're trying to do, but how other leading organizations are achieving success through the work that we're about to start. So letting them know they have to also deal with their set of ambiguity, right? Because they don't know what this new thing is, right? But I'm actually letting them know we're not the first pioneers to do this. There are other leading companies that are doing this. We must do this for XYZ reasons. So then they begin to think, okay, I think what Robert is saying is probably something that we need to think about, not prioritize yet. They're going to think about it. The third thing that they're going to ask you is how much resources you're going to need and how much money you need.
That's right.
And they're going to tell you, we got other priorities. We got hundreds of other priorities is what they're going to tell you. So what I always do is to make the program budgets to be bite-sized, if you will, upfront, where we're going to either do POCs or MVPs that's visible. and be able to make sure that we can show them the capabilities we're building in a smaller sprints, Sanchit, so that stakeholders can actually touch, feel, and see it.
More tangible outcomes on an ongoing basis, right?
That's right. And then we iterate through this, which is what typical agile methodology shop would do, until we get to a model where we have an enterprise rollout.
Interesting. And you said you work with startups and you have a new approach to alliances. Now, one of the biggest worries, I do a lot of work with some large conglomerates, and what I see consistently as a feedback is that, look, they're very worried, right? I'm sure you guys are as well, that when you work with startups, are they, there are obvious questions about data security, data privacy, and the fact that will they even stay for a long time, right? So how do you sort of personally, as a leader and as for your peers and others in the company, overcome that sort of mindset about startups?
Sanchit, so we don't pretend to be an expert in every single area of digital ecosystem, because obviously there are so many startups that are emerging from Singapore, India, the US, Europe, and Korea, for matter of fact. So as you know, you cannot keep up with all the startups and what it is that they're trying to do and what startups are going to last, as you alluded to. So one of the things that we do is we actually define a couple of verticals that we're going to actually be experts in.
Okay.
Whether that's a human capital management or cybersecurity, we pick those two areas and we declare an intent to say, okay, in this area, we're not going to leverage only technology within Doosan, but we're going to potentially actually resell these technology or even co-innovate with them. Or when it makes sense for startups, we may even co-invest in them as a strategic investor, right? So we have this kind of a view of the world. So then we actually dive into looking at startups from, initially my view was, Sanchit, I looked at more mature startups, right?
Makes sense.
Startups that went through Series D or Series F raise, they're waiting to IPO. But then since they're so mature compared to other early startups, you sometimes do not get the time and day from them because they're so big, right? So we started from that spectrum. Now we're kind of engaging our spectrum value chain down into early startups with Series B, Series A raise. Because now we kind of know what we need to look for. And from an NDA or data standpoint, we're not too concerned because at the end of the day, we're not going to do truly breakthrough type of work with startups that we don't have a lot of experience with. We're going to do small increments to prove ourselves and prove their capabilities first. So we're not too readily concerned about data security.
Very interesting. And it's very fascinating. And I know at one end, you've got alliances like IBM in a very big way and startups at the other end. So I sort of like that combination. But before I go to sort of more mature things around IBM, but what I really want to also ask you to sort of help me with is double click on the digital and Doosan. I'll tell you where I'm coming from. The fact that it has so many lines of business, it's always easy for a technology executive to sort of have, let's say, a common baseline. Let's talk about identity and access management as an example. As a leader, you would naturally find it easier to, let's say, have a common set of policies and tools for identity across all businesses. But the fact is, not all their needs are the same, right? Some let's say, service-led businesses may have a very different need from identity and, let's say, even networks, for example, compared to manufacturing, which is a very different network and identity setup. Now, how do you sort of bake in these nuances of, let's say, individual business needs alongside common baselines across the Doosan group?
Sanchit, there are two ways to answer that question. Number one would be, there are some non-negotiable common controls and things we have to deploy across all of our enterprise as the base, right? So sometimes, when it comes to security, especially IT security, there are some common controls that we deploy. Yes, there could be some user inconveniences at the time, but at the end of the day, it outweighs our potential data loss for unintentional, bad actors, right? So we do that non-negotiable bottom layer, layer one. Above it, I'm going to give you some examples of OT security. We operate in about 40 countries, Sanchit. Not all manufacturing plants are created equal. Therefore, we don't have to invest the same amount of money and efforts into every single manufacturing facility. So when we architected our OT security architecture, we built 5 different deployment models and 5 different management models and 5 different policies that we apply depending on different complexities as well as the location of the plant. We deploy different architecture and different controls. So this is an example on where we're kind of customizing, if you will, the OT security models to secure our plants while giving each plant the flexibility of spending a little less if they're less of a complex site than the other.
Interesting, very interesting. It's very fascinating. I'd love to sort of go a lot more deeper, but in the interest of time, I really want to change gears and talk a little bit about DDI. The fact that you have an exclusive business unit to talk about and, find expertise in digital. And I think that's very fascinating. Not many conglomerates across the world have been able to successfully sort of establish that BU and make it profitable. So, I'd love to sort of pick your brains, Robert, around what's the strategy behind DDI? What's the guiding philosophy? What are you sort of looking to achieve with DDI? And more importantly, I've been tracking IT services for about 2 decades myself, and it's a highly commoditized market. It's a very busy market. Margins are razor thin. And the only way to succeed in this is platformization and IP at some stage right now. Talk to me, please, about what's DDI's focus areas? Are there early wins you're looking at? Is there a platformization strategy? Please give me some sense.
So Sanchit, as you introduced me at the beginning of the call, I have 2 roles within Doosan Group. Number 1 is I have this pleasure of running Doosan Digital Strategy at the group level, working on all of our great companies within the portfolio. So I have digital strategy, digital planning, and also looking at digital execution models that we build across all of our portfolio. So that's one role. Number 2 role, as you alluded to, is I am the global COO, fully responsible for the P&L of the Doosan Digital Innovation business units to build different IT-related services, service our internal captive customers, as well as building external go-to-market strategies to build external sources of revenue as well. So fascinating kind of combination of 2 different roles, strategy to execution, right? So from a DDI standpoint, we've been formed back in 1970s, late 70s, as a business unit within Doosan. Back then, for the longest time, I think Doosan Digital Innovation was called something different, Sanchit, in Korean. But back then, their mission was one thing: service our internal captive customers from an IT standpoint really, really well. As the timing is evolving, we quickly realize some of the crown jewels and knowledge that we've gained by doing this is not something that we should only keep internal to Doosan. We could actually go to market and generate demand external to Doosan as well. So now the current mission is not only about looking at servicing our internal customers or affiliates really, really well through IT and digital, but it is also to build out external capabilities to go to market. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
We have a declared intent to go to market with SAP's SuccessFactors as a platform that we go out to implement. Doosan was the first HCM cloud user base in Korea about 7-8 years ago. Based on the implementation of SuccessFactors in the company, as well as the operating aspects of it, we've gained so much knowledge. And about 2-3 years ago, we quickly realized that the market was embracing human capital management on the cloud. So the market was forming. What we've decided to do in a heavy way, starting especially the last 2 years, is to package up our ability to go to market from consulting standpoint, from an implementation standpoint, and then post-launch application management support standpoint.
Okay.
So today we can proudly say that we actually have a pretty thriving SuccessFactors business, not only within Doosan, but we're actually building this external to Doosan, especially in Korea. We're trying to do the same thing with security. Sanchit, as you know, we've done a ton of new work, next generation security work with IBM Security and some of the other partners. So based on that knowledge gained, now we're trying to go to market with our security offerings in Korea as well.
Interesting. And I have 2 questions there. What my observation tells me is that for a model like this to be successful, there ought to be a sort of approach to make frameworks, which sort of are self-learning frameworks, right? And that alongside with the fact that you have an evolving team that understands these frameworks and is able to implement in different client scenarios. So tell me, give me some examples as to how are you sort of helping develop some of these frameworks, which will make it easy to implement and probably automate a few basic processes. And at the same time, how are you sort of onboarding new skill sets within DDI and sort of to ensure that you are the provider of choice, so to say?
Right. So it's a very complex question, Sanchit. I appreciate that. So number one of the things we have is we have declared intent called the Lighthouse strategy within Doosan Digital Innovation. So let me explain what that is. the lighthouse strategy entails 4 steps in the process.
Okay.
Number 1 is we have to, first of all, become an expert on a given technology by using, deploying, implementing, and day-to-day use that set of technology within Doosan first. Okay?
So really like eat your own dog food, literally, right?
That's right. We implement it, we learn it, we learn from our mistakes. We have our positives and negatives from learning a given set of technology. We go through that phase first. Without it, we're no expert, right?
Yeah.
The second step of the process is that once a given set of technology makes it through that stage, we decide to figure out whether there's a market demand for such technology.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's the answer to that is yes, we build what we call go-to-market strategy, which is all about building the external focused teams, external partners, external models, external pricing model, if you will, to go to market. We call that the second step of the lighthouse strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The third step of the lighthouse strategy is once we work with a given partner long enough to be their customer and their partner, then we also push the envelope to become their co-innovation partner to bring Doosan and the market's feedback into what should be in the next release, and work with the co-innovation team of the other company to drive their product roadmap. And then if the given company is actually a privately held company pre-IPO, I would like to also put my skin in the game by putting in strategic investment in a small portion, not in a big way. We're not a venture capitalist, right? So small way. So we also have a skin in the game in their success, as well as their potential success can also help us as well. So this is the model we use.
No, it's very fascinating. And you know, another question that sort of dovetails very nicely as part of this conversation is, and you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, is about cultural evolution. Now, again, out of 20 years of what I've been doing this, one of the biggest roadblocks I see for the success of any BU like this is the cultural transformation and the nuance around sales. Because, you know, the fact is that such organizations and BUs are never inherent sales organizations. And embedding that sales ethos in the company becomes a difficult job, and there's a learning curve for executives like yourself as well who've never been part of the sales cycles as to how do you personally also become a sales expert. I'm not saying you're not, don't take me otherwise, but I'm just saying that I have seen this broadly. Now, how are you sort of imbibing that methodology and thought process of becoming a sales-oriented organization that actually sells solutions?
As Sanchit, I believe every executive or every employee with any company, whether it's Doosan or not, you know, they have to be selling all the time, right? So this is about selling their products and services and the brand of the company. So, you know, I believe I'm selling Doosan stuff, not just technology stuff, but our products to our market all the time, becoming some of the evangelists for making sure that people can understand what it is that we're trying to sell into the market. So without our products and services and companies, the digital doesn't exist, right? So one of the things I really emphasize from our team is we're all salespeople for Doosan. We just happen to have functional expertise in digital. Now, way back in my career, Sanchit, I'm looking at way back in my career. I used to sell software way back in my career as one of the things I've done early part of my career. But I would not claim myself as a sales expert by any means. So I'm really thankful to have a mixture of sales teams within DDI that are balanced out between our internal experts, who's been with DDI for many years, as well as infused with external sales talents to create this business development team that's relatively effective in going to market. I'm very thankful for the work that they've done in transitioning and transforming their model. And, you know, we use, you know, great tools like Salesforce.com to make sure that we have a visibility in our sales pipeline. You know, how do we prospect? How do we increase our chances of winning a deal? And how do we ultimately service the customer? And how do we get the feedback? So we actually use Salesforce, where in our bi-weekly meetings, where I'm directly involved in, we actually look at our sales pipeline and seeing how successful we are in the market, servicing our customers' needs.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's quickly shift gears to IBM. You know, that was a topic we were brought together to speak about in the first place. So let's give that due attention. You know, I know you've been working with IBM for a very, very long time. I think this is probably your third company bringing an IBM into, and especially around. I know you've done work with them on the IX part and now on the cybersecurity part. clearly there is a trusted relationship here. Now, what I really want to talk to you about is a few things. One, what about IBM sort of, makes you want them again and again? One is that. And second of all, if you could highlight the contours and specifics of your relationship with IBM as to what tools do you use, etc., will sort of help paint the picture, please.
Right. So, Sanchit, I've been very fortunate in my career to develop great working relationships with my great partners. Right. So, IBM is one of the companies I work with a lot. But let me not stop there. It's not just about IBM. It's about other companies in the ecosystem that I appreciate. They challenge my assumptions. They give me different viewpoints, and also they give me different technologies for us to advance our agenda. Right. So it's many, including IBM, that I work with. And as I mentioned to you earlier, IBM is one of the companies I work with, as you alluded to, many occasions in my career. And there are other startups too, Sanchit, that I work with in the same manner as well. From an IBM standpoint, right now, we have a very deep strategic relationships with IBM regarding our cybersecurity, right? So this has to do with looking at our cybersecurity posture, the visibility, how do we potentially deal with potential threats, how do we prevent, how do we automate? So whole aspects of what we do from a cybersecurity standpoint, IBM Security is a great partner. And building a great partner entails a lot of different aspects or dimensions, right? Number one is having that top-to-top alignment of the common vision and purpose on why each of the companies exist. And IBM Security is laser focused around making sure that their customers are secure, right? And from our Doosan's point of view, as I alluded to, our digital transformation agenda entails next generation cybersecurity has to be step number one. So from a purpose and our vision standpoint, we're very much aligned. From the model down, their executive team within IBM Security from a global standpoint are always available to bounce off ideas and discuss different topics with me. The availability, as well as the not only being available to take my phone calls, but available to provide their real-time thought leadership that allows me to think about what we would do, is another value that IBM brings to the table. I'm sure other companies do the same thing, including some of the companies I would mention on the call. But at the same time, this is another key differentiator. Third thing is they're very much aligned with my design doing comment that I made.
Sure.
This is not about thinking. This is not about having ideas. This is not about whiteboarding all day long. They're so focused around idea to execution to success in a very rapid manner. So these are some of the attributes I look for in my partners. And IBM, along with some of the other global companies I work with, tend to share similar attributes.
And can you give me some examples of some specific products or use cases you are specifically championing with IBM? Because I'm sure other CIOs and CTOs who are listening to this conversation will be sort of a little more keen to understand some specifics around the product roadmap and the architecture.
So we work with IBM from a global security operations center standpoint. So we've established multiple locations. I'm not going to say exact number, but we've established multiple global security operations centers throughout the globe in partnership with IBM. Number two is, from a product standpoint, we use their QRadar as our SIEM platform to allows us to make sense out of all the sensor data, all the other random data that we get into our environment, and be able to synthesize it and narrow it down to the stuff that we should only be focused on, because there's a lot of AI automation element that they built into our QRadar instance that allows us to only focus on what matters the most, rather than worrying about all the noise that could be in our system. And obviously this has to be continuously fine-tuned, because obviously the things would change over time. So IBM does a really good job of not only providing QRadar as an artificial intelligence-led, automation-led platform, but their team does a really good job of keeping up with new intelligence and being able to enhance our filters, if you will, to make sure that those are relevant.
And how do the DDI teams and the IBM teams sort of coordinate with each other, learn from each other? Because, while you need global thinking in SOC, I appreciate that, but you also need local acting, because the fact is that the threat factors are very, very local sometimes, and the products need to be sort of speaking to the local nuances of the country or the region. So I'm really keen to understand, how do the two teams, which is DDI and IBM, work in tandem to learn from each other and sort of customize the product for local needs?
Great question. So I think there are two elements to your questions, right? So number one is in terms of the global working model of setting kind of the right tone, whether it's monthly cadence, weekly cadence, or any other incident management cadence that we develop within IBM, as well as our other cybersecurity partners. So initially, when we started this journey, I've actually chaired a lot of those calls, Sanchit. So you need to lead by example. So I've attended a lot of those calls to make sure that we have the right operating model at the global level down. And Chris McCurdy from IBM also did the same thing, where he came to each one of those meetings to make sure that he showed his support, as well as empowering his team to do the same thing. So we had this top-down support model to get the operation model going. Now we're to a point where we have a regional security teams in Europe, North America, as well as in Asia, where these regional teams work with their regional counterparts of IBM to make sure that they can have an ongoing dialogue, whether it's weekly dialogue or incident dialogue, to make sure that they have lines of communication open.
Right.
And we also have a quarterly steering committee meeting where myself and Chris and other leadership teams from both parties get involved, both companies get involved to talk about what's next.
Right. Right. And are there any specific areas between the two teams which I'll sort of highlight? For example, is it zero trust? Are there specific security areas that both companies are looking to champion in the next coming months?
It is about looking at how do we continue to fine tune the models that we built in the security area. So let me give you an example, maybe a more specific example around EDR and MDR, which is one of the things we are working with IBM as well as Cybersecurity in terms of EDR services provider. Initially, we've actually looked at 3 different EDR services provider within Doosan. We actually did POCs for all 3 software selections. I'm not going to say the other 2 that didn't make the cut. So we actually tested 3 other solutions along with Cybersecurity with IBM's help. So we deployed, enough of 3 different EDR flavors in our global footprint to really understand what it is that these EDR solutions can do and cannot do. Through that process, we actually picked one EDR provider, in this case, Cybersecurity, and working with IBM's expertise, we actually rolled it out across all of our endpoints and servers in record time. I'm not going to say how fast we did it because they'll be kind of bragging ourselves, but it was in record time. But not only rolling out EDR, but we quickly layered in the managed detective response services on top of it, tied into their global SOC structure.
Right.
So that we have real-time visibility and real-time prevention ability, as well as real-time reaction ability in every endpoint we serve.
And are there specific verticals where you're expecting EDR and MDR to do better than the others? Or are there specific countries where you're thinking of going at for EDR and MDR?
So from my standpoint, Sanchit, one of the non-negotiable controls that I mentioned to you is EDR and MDR on all of our endpoints, no matter where we are, right?
Excellent.
So that's non-negotiable. It's deployed to every area of our business, and it's layered through that MDR service that we look at. So, it's for me, it's not a selection or choices. It's just it's a common security platform we roll out.
Interesting. Sure. And, you mentioned Cybersecurity, excellent choice of partner there. What's the sort of roadmap in your own as an executive that you think about? What's next? Let's say you've got IBM on QRadar, excellent choice. You've got Cybersecurity on EDR, MDR, excellent choice again. What's next here on in terms of similar partner onboarding for more specific security choices and solutions?
Right, Sanchit, what's next is that now that we have different IT and OT related controls in place within Doosan, as I mentioned to you, this is not a one and done investment. This has to be a continuous investment that we do over many years forward, right? So one of the things we're looking at is, Cybersecurity calls it the XDR platform, which is being able to inject different sources of sensor data, different sources of security data into their detect and response platform, and using a layer like QRadar to be able to decipher through that, so that you're not only looking at your endpoints and servers and some of the critical servers and infrastructure, we're looking at different sensor points across the board. One of the other things I have a huge interest in is how do we go about changing our product development lifecycle, where we're already doing this, but how do we codify bringing security and AI related discussions really early on into our actual product lifecycle, so that our engineers can look at, AI and security implications as they design products for the market.
But I'm sure in every relationship, everything is not hunky-dory. I'm sure even with IBM as well, there are things that are work in progress or not being done so great. Give me something, an example where, let's say, you had a difference of opinion with IBM, or let's say, according to you, things needed to change, and some examples will help.
I wouldn't say it's the alignment or misalignment from an opinion standpoint or thought leadership standpoint, because at the end of the day, we kind of work that out, whether it's IBM or other partners, because at the end of the day, our partners are trying to push us to do what's best for the organization, right? That they're trying to service. So I have that. I understand that intention. So I usually do not get into a prolonged debate or disconnect. But at the same time, our strategic partners, including IBM, understand well enough that I've been around the block long enough too, where my opinion could also be something that they have to look at as well. So we understand each other from that sense. And what we do is from that point on, if there's a misalignment or discussions, we have obviously a series of meetings and discussions to solve that and come to a consensus. Once we come to a consensus, we get on board and move on with it, because we don't have time in the world to debate and debate. It's about design doing, as I told you, right?
Design doing. I'm really fascinated with design doing. I'm going to remember that forever, Robert. And in the closing, since you have two separate roles within Doosan, if I could ask you to sort of close this conversation by giving me two lists, since you're an expert at lists. I've been hearing lists since the starting of this conversation: 1, 2, 3, 4. So give me a 5-pointer list for both of your roles in terms of focus for 2023. Digital and Doosan as an executives, what are the 5 areas that you really will build on and focus on here on, and 5 areas where for DDI, which let's say CIOs and CTOs and CISOs around you could take note of for DDI?
Sanchit, that's a great question. And I know I'll kind of give you a pretty long question and answer on this one. From a corporate digital standpoint, there are a few things we're really looking to do. One thing is all about continuous investment into next generation cybersecurity. As I alluded to, this is not one and done. This is a continuous investment and fine tuning of what we do globally. So we intend to obviously put our investment, our resources, our emphasis on cybersecurity constantly, number one. Number two, we're looking at AI as a key lever that we could utilize. We came up with a terminology called sustainable AI because of the fact that we have a lot of businesses that requires ESG related viewpoints. So we are going to work with our affiliates to make sure that we have AI related winning cases developed, not only developed, but produced in terms of how we go about creating sustainability through AI, number two. Number three, we're also looking into quantum computing as the next frontier, to look at our material sciences business, looking at how do we use quantum computing to not only service our material science vertical of our business, but also to develop our future talents for quantum computing. Because before you know it, quantum world will be here, as you know.
Yeah.
The fourth thing is all about looking at co-innovation opportunities with large enterprises such as IBM, Microsoft, and AWS, to name a few, tying this all the way down to some of the startups that we need to look at. The fifth one is looking at some interesting co-partnership and co-investment opportunities, as well as universities we can work with to do co-innovation work to amplify what we do. So those are 5 things that we plan to do at the group level. Within DDI, because it's a P&L-based business model, because in the first half of 2023, as you know better than I do, the world economy is, pretty slow right now, right? At a macro level, a lot of the indicators are telling us that it's not going to be such a fascinating growth-oriented year in 2023. Sure. So one of the key things I'm doing is looking at ways to make our DDI operation much more efficient from a global operations point of view, whether it's via automation or leverage AI. So efficiency viewpoint is number one that we're all embracing within DDI across multiple entities we have. Number two is all about, while we're looking at efficiency, the market will bounce back. As you know, you and I know we've been around long enough that it will bounce back again. We cannot just focus on optimizing or making things more efficient. We need to also continue to look at creating digital related outputs, both for Doosan affiliates and external to Doosan as well. The third thing I'm really looking at doing is, while we're doing the first 2 things really, really well, I want to actually build significant external businesses in the areas of HCM and cybersecurity that I alluded to. These are my two focus areas. I want to make sure that we build bigger, even bigger base than what we have today as the third lever. The fourth one is I want to make sure our employees feel like they're winning with the company as well. So being able to have them feel like they're being trained, they're being cared for, they're being encouraged, and they feel like they're winning in the market would be some of the key elements we look at from DDI standpoint. And lastly, obviously I want to build a better working relationship with my working partners, strategic partners like IBM, Microsoft, AWS, Cybersecurity, and hopefully you, Sanchit, and Greyhound as well.
Sure. Thank you. Robert, this has been a wonderful conversation and it's extremely insightful. I'll tell you what I took away was the amazing laser sharp clarity you have on both sides of the business. I think it's not easy to be where you are in your shoes and yet have that clarity. And I love your ability to have lists. I think since question 1 to now, I think you've been very focused on what are your top priorities. So thank you. This has been a very, very insightful conversation, and I truly appreciate you giving time to Greyhound Research, Robert.
Sanchit, thank you so much for your time as well. I enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully this is helpful in some way. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear viewers, thanks for making time to see the full episode. I hope you found it as valuable and insightful as I did. Of course, if you have any tough questions for Robert, do send them in, and I'm sure I'll ping him and get you answers that you need. But thanks for having the patience to see through this interview. And I hope that I'll catch you again for the next one. Thanks once again.